Of all the angering news stories that eat at me, nothing bothers me more than the mass murder where the perpetrator escapes prosecution, or the blatant highway robbery but the police and DA fail to prosecute because of political connections or bribery, or the shameless criminal behavior but the perpetrator is given immunity from prosecution because of an illogical, inconsistent law. It's always the same type of criminal who gets away with this behavior. Society knows that certain criminal harm occurs, but the politicians, judiciary, and the media all remain complicit. The notorious, infamous public enemy committing these crimes is, of course, the corporation. A corporation is a legal entity created by a human or group of humans that has at least some of the legal rights and responsibilities enjoyed by natural people. For instance, the right to enter into a contract with other parties and to sue or be sued in court the same way people can't. A problem I explore in this video series is that the law has conveyed corporations many benefits of personhood, but not all the responsibilities. Although we say that a corporation has the rights as human beings, man created corporations. God did not.
Life, do you hear me? Give my creation life! Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
The law requires corporations to place the financial interest of their owners above the public good. A judicial decision specifically prohibits corporations from acting for the public good if it could cost stockholders financial gain. The stockholders of the majority of corporate wealth is not the general public, but a small number of extremely wealthy stockholders. It's common sense that it's more profitable to make others pay for the corporation's negative impact on society, and that's exactly what current corporate law allows. Quoting the movie The Corporation, the term that economists use is, quote, externality, unquote. And that's the effect of a transaction between two individuals upon a third party who hasn't consented to or played any role in the carrying out of that transaction. The movie further draws the analogy that a corporation is an externalizing machine in the same way a shark's a killing machine.
Each one is designed in a very efficient way to accomplish particular objectives. In the achievement of those objectives, there isn't any question of malevolence or of will. The enterprise has within it, and the shark has within it, those characteristics that enable it to do that for which it was designed.
So the pressure's on the corporation to deliver results now and to externalize any cost that this unwary or uncaring public will allow it to externalize.
Back in the late 1800s, we created a man-made legal entity that has no soul, no conscience, that's going to roam society with all the powers of a natural citizen. Although you can sue them, they can't be held liable of the most hideous, harmful mass murders or slaughters. Legally, as it was just explained, they have to only benefit their owners and master, and they harm everyone else to their benefit. Our judges, in all their legal brilliance, turned a corporation, this man-made inanimate object, a citizen, as if it was a living, breathing, walking, all-powerful, soulless person in our society. This, at one time, sounded like a good idea. In the next part of this video, we'll analyze the psyche of a corporate citizen that makes decisions based only upon financial gain and profit, without considering the negative impact that its choices have on society.
We can even formulate a diagnosis on the basis of typical case histories of harm it has inflicted on others, selected from a universe of corporate activity.
Let's look at it from the point of view of the people in Bangladesh who are starving to death, the people in China who are starving to death, and the only thing that they have to offer to anybody that is worth anything is their low-cost labor. And in effect, what they are saying to the world is they have this big flag that says, come over and hire us. We will work for 10 cents an hour because 10 cents an hour will buy us the rice that we need not to starve. And come and rescue us from our circumstance. And so when Nike comes in, they are regarded by everybody in the community as an enormous godsend. What happens in the areas where these corporations go in and are successful? They soon find that they can't do any more in that country because the wages are too high now. And what's that another way of saying? Well, the people are no longer desperate. So, okay, we've used up all the desperate people there. They're all plump and healthy and wealthy. Let's move on to the next desperate lot and employ them and raise their level up.
And the tax holidays get longer. So the workers rarely make enough money to buy 3 meals a day, let alone feed their local economy.
Fabrics, toothbrushes, tires, insecticides, cosmetics, weed killers, a whole galaxy of things to make a better life on Earth.
Many of the hazardous chemicals produced by corporations affect the workers, society, and the general public. The products pollute the air and water, cause cancer and birth defects. Often the industry knows about the harmful effects of its chemicals, but they attempt to trivialize these risks to reduce financial, legal exposure, and blatantly lie about them.
There's no evidence whatsoever of any adverse effects. We don't use antibiotics. And this clearly showed that they had lied through their teeth.
We know that people are consuming antibiotics through their food. And we know that that's contributing to antibiotic-resistant bacteria and diseases. And we know we're at a crisis when somebody can go into a hospital and get a staph infection and it can't be cured and they die. That's a crisis.
Monsanto settled out of court, paying $80 million in damages. But it never admitted guilt.
Sleeping in a motel in Brewer, Maine one night, I woke up with terrible hay fever and my eyes were burning, and I looked out at the river and there were great mounds of white foam going right down the river. I knew not one constituent of the paper mills wanted to have the river polluted. And it was more or less as if we created a doom machine. In our search for wealth and for prosperity, we created something that's going to destroy us.
At Multinational Monitor, we put together a list of the top corporate criminals of the 1990s. We went back and looked at all of the criminal fines that corporations had paid in the decade. Exxon pled guilty in connection to federal criminal charges with the Valdez spill and paid $125 million in criminal fines. General Electric was guilty of defrauding the federal government and paid $9.5 million in criminal fines. Chevron was guilty of environmental violations and paid $6.5 million in fines. Mitsubishi was guilty of antitrust violations and paid $1.8 million in fines. IBM was guilty of illegal exports and paid $8.5 million. Was guilty of environmental violations. Pfizer, the drug manufacturer was guilty of antitrust violations and paid $20 million.
Of food and drug regulatory violations.
Sears was guilty of financial fraud.
Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois.
Unical was guilty of fraud.
Environmental
$4 million. Korean Airlines paid finance violation. It paid $250,000. Hoffman LaRouche, guilty of an antitrust violation, paid $500 million in criminal fines.
Again and again, we have the problem that whether you obey the law or not is a matter of whether it's cost effective. If the chance of getting caught and the penalty are less than it costs to comply, people think of it as being just a business decision.
Man has created a psychopath, a citizen criminal whose legal duty, obligation, and programming is to earn money for its master and screw everyone else. The law is that the people who run corporations can be guilty of a crime, breach of a fiduciary duty to its shareholders, if they don't only act for the benefit of the shareholders to maximize profits without considering others. The price we pay for our corporate wealth generating machine is that it has the following personality: a callous lack of concern for others, no capacity to maintain relationships, reckless disregard for people's safety, lying for profit, incapacity to experience guilt, and failure to conform to social norms. Of course, corporations have positive impact upon society as well. Corporations have created enormous wealth and progress and employ countless people. The corporation is a business vehicle that has enabled people to soar to great heights and bring immeasurable financial benefits to society. And now, we will discuss whether the current corporate model is sustainable and what alternative business models are available.
One day, early in this journey, it dawned on me that the way I've been running Interface is the way of the plunderer. Plundering something that's not mine, something that belongs to every creature on earth. And I said to myself, my goodness, the day must come when this is illegal, that when plundering is not allowed. I mean, it must come. So I said to myself, my goodness, someday people like me will end up in jail.
There is a solution to liberate corporate decision makers from having to make such selfish decisions. It's called the B Corporation, which is short for the Benefit Corporation. It has been a gradual change throughout the country, and Benjamin Anderson of B Lab explains the new Benefit Corporation, which has been in existence for only about 10 years, a relatively short time. Watch.
And people wanting to use business as a force for good. And so there are now 2,300 certified B Corps in 50 countries around the globe in 120 plus industries. That community of certified B Corps has leveraged the creation of what we call the Benefit Corporation, the legislation that allows and requires a board to govern the company in a way that considers other stakeholder interests. There are 5,000 Benefit Corps in the United States. Benefit Corp has passed in Italy, and that legislation is in play in several dozen other countries around the globe. We also have now over 50,000 companies that are using the B Impact Assessment, the tool that we use to apply the standards to certify companies. But that community of 2,300 certified companies has leveraged or attracted 50,000 other companies to use the tools and that standards to serve as the guardrails for running a better business.
In this next clip, Professor John Montgomery of the Holt Business School encourages graduates to start companies with this new option, the B Corp, rather than the old profit-only model.
There's a paradigm shift underway in the global economic system. The current paradigm, which is maximize profit for shareholders and foist all the negative consequences of corporate behavior that you can get away with off on the commons, is about to be replaced by a new one, which is optimize profits and provide a material positive impact on society and the environment. So what the benefit corporation starts to do is activate the new paradigm and provide a legal foundation and a legal framework for businesses like Nikkei's. So it becomes possible to set up a business where you commit to optimize profit and provide a material positive impact on society. The directors have fiduciary duties to not only the shareholders, but all of the corporation stakeholders, including society and the environment. And the company has to measure its performance in providing a material positive impact on society and the environment against an independent third-party standard. That's where the accountability comes in. And you've got a choice. You've got a choice as to whether you want to perpetuate the old paradigm or create the new.
That's just it. The problem is the benefit corporation's only a choice, not a requirement. The typical corporation still is free to be a shark and plunderer, and we have to hope that future business owners choose this new paradigm of the new good corporation and reject the old paradigm of the evil plunderer.
The profit motive, which drove FTSE to accomplish so much, may bring out the evil as well as the good.
Yes, future business owners have the option to select that old psychopathic corporation, or they can choose this new benefit corporation, as legislatures of some states, Pennsylvania included, have made it optional to allow a company to operate in the best interests of all the community as well as the shareholders. But shouldn't it be mandatory? The benefit corporation is supposed to be even a better business model. A Harvard study tested 90 companies, and results showed that those who adopted the benefit corporation financially outperformed non-benefit corporations by 5%. So there's incentive to be a good corporate citizen. Another question: has the mainstream media sufficiently educated you about corporate behavior and the selfish legal restrictions on them, the dangers to the community? Knowing that now that there's a choice, do you believe that there's sufficient societal pressure for all companies to be a benefit corporation? Please let me know what you think. Shouldn't a benefit corporation be mandatory? And if it's not mandatory, shouldn't there be transparency about which type of corporation a corporation chooses? Do you think the mainstream media has done a good job of publicizing this important issue? So a call to action. We as citizens have the power to spend and invest in only companies who are good corporate citizens. We also can insist on voting only for lawmakers who pass laws requiring transparency and good behavior, not only from natural persons, but also from our corporations.
You've got a choice as to whether you want to perpetuate the old paradigm or create the new.
Although passing optional B Corporation status is certainly a good start, we as a people should demand the same good behavior from all our corporate neighbors as is demanded from natural human beings. We've discussed the psychological profile and negative impact of the corporate citizen without a soul and the more preferred B Corporation. Now let's discuss economic policies which benefit the richest, most powerful corporate citizens, the negative impact on the middle class, and how corporations put these unpopular laws into place. This next segment of this video is adapted from Robert Reich and his documentary, Saving Capitalism. So what is the goal of the middle class? We want a better life than what our parents had, and the beauty of after post-World War II America, it was realistic and often achieved. But now the rules have changed and there's not a level playing field. How have the rules changed? And why are so many earning so much less? Well, let's look at the rules. The rules are policy decisions created by the government, and they favor those in power. For instance, wealthy corporations created bankruptcy rules so corporations can erase unlimited debt, but students can't declare bankruptcy from student loans, and homeowners can't declare bankruptcy if they're underwater because of their mortgages. These laws are government policies and regulations favoring the powerful corporations over individuals. Change in income in the United States tells the story of what happened to the middle class. Income growth was shared by everyone after World War II until about 1973. Then the top 5 income bracket continued to grow, but the median and bottom brackets didn't. So what triggered the diversion between the wealthy and the middle class? Well, in 1971, a corporate lobbyist, Lewis Powell, wrote to the Chamber of Commerce. He wrote that the entire free enterprise system is under attack by colleges, the media, and government, and they were all taken over. This Powell Manifesto, as it was called, was a call to action for big business. Quote from the manifesto itself: "Political power is necessary. It must be assiduously cultivated, aggressively, with determination, and without embarrassment, and without the reluctance that has been characteristic of American business." And again, this is back in 1971 here. It went further. "Most importantly, in light of an activist Supreme Court, the judiciary is the most important vehicle for social, political, and economic change." In response to this document came the policies of President Ronald Reagan, who spoke out against government and in favor of shrinking regulations in favor of big business.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. Government, with its high taxes, excessive spending, and overregulation, had thrown a wrench in the works of our free markets.
The government still made the laws, but the laws were in favor of the big business and big money and against the middle class. After the Reagan era and the policies implemented by his administration, the middle class started to shrink. Anger began in the 1990s with the middle class salary in decline. The rich got wealthier and the number of poor grew. The economy skyrocketed, but wages went down. This graph illustrates corporate profits going up and wages going way down. As money goes to the top, so does political power, because with increased wealth comes the ability to change the rules in the game. People who operate government do it for their own self-interest, and corporations operate government and make the rules to benefit themselves. The Powell Memorandum is evidence that separation of wealth between the working class and the corporate billionaire class didn't happen accidentally. It was a conscious power grab by corporate America starting in 1971. And then in 1973, even more. And then after the Reagan administration between 80 and 83, income separation between the rich and the poor became even more dramatic. Here's an example of this shifting. Bill Clinton campaigned for president on a platform for rolling back excessive CEO pay, which more than tripled from 88 to 92, because this pay was deductible to corporations. Clinton's idea was to cap this write-off for executive salary above the first million. But what actually happened was the new law he put in place gave an exception for performance pay in bonuses, which allowed CEO pay to continue to rise to astronomical levels and be completely tax deductible. This graph illustrates the spike in executive pay immediately after that tax law. Another example of government policy in favor of big businesses was the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which cost taxpayers nearly trillions of dollars. Glass-Steagall Act was passed in 1933 to protect people's hard-earned savings from Wall Street speculative investments. Once Glass-Steagall was removed, nothing separated investment banks from commercial banks, and nothing regulated something called derivatives, speculative investment, that ushered too big to fail mega banks. Senator Sanders warned against its repeal.
I believe this legislation in its current form will do more harm than good. It will lead to fewer banks and financial service providers, increased charges and fees for individual consumers and small businesses, diminished credit for rural America, and taxpayer exposure to potential losses should a financial conglomerate fail.
This repeal led to the stock market crash of 2008. We're all painfully familiar with this. So how did this happen? By design, the government caused the need for a big bailout, and it continues this current situation of unregulated banks to this day. Another example, in June of 2003, the Medicare Modernization Act. It was supposed to help seniors to pay for prescription drugs, but what actually happened was it prevented the government from negotiating prescription drug reimbursements. So it fixed drug prices at astronomically high levels and caused taxpayers to pay the highest drug prices of any industrialized nation. It was hailed as free market, but it was actually a government policy in favor of big pharma. Regulation versus deregulation is not the issue. The issue is what kind of regulation, or who does regulation benefit? The old regulation protected the middle class. Now, regulation protects mega billionaire corporations.
We have to end corporate welfare now. When corporations get special handouts from the government, subsidies and tax breaks, it costs you. It means you have to pay more in taxes to make up for these hidden expenses. And government has less money for good schools and roads, Medicare and national defense, and everything else you need. You might call these special corporate handouts corporate welfare. But at least welfare goes to real people in need. Corporations are not people, despite what the Supreme Court says, and they don't need or deserve handouts. In the big picture, corporate welfare is costing tens of billions of dollars a year. Some estimates put it over $100 billion. In reality, only about 12% of federal spending goes to individuals and families. An increasing portion goes to corporate welfare. For example, the oil, gas, and coal industries get billions in their own special tax breaks. Big agribusiness gets farm subsidies. Big pharma gets their own subsidy in the form of a ban on government using its bargaining power under Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices. Big Wall Street banks have an implicit guarantee they'll be bailed out if they get into trouble again. And hedge fund and private equity managers get a special tax loophole that treats their income as capital gains at a lower tax rate than ordinary income.
An increase in corporate monopolies is another force adversely impacting the middle class, and this was caused by a relaxation of the enforcement of antitrust laws. Reich explains.
Monsanto alone owns the key genetic traits to more than 90% of the soybeans planted by farmers in the United States and 80% of the corn, which means Monsanto can charge farmers much higher prices. And farmers are getting squeezed from the other side, too, because the food processors they sell their produce to are also consolidating into mega companies that have so much market power they can cut the prices they pay to farmers. This doesn't mean lower food prices to you. It means more profits to the monopolists. America used to have antitrust laws that stopped corporations from monopolizing markets and often broke up the biggest culprits. No longer. It's a hidden upward redistribution of money and power from the majority of Americans to corporate executives and wealthy shareholders. The four largest food companies control 82% of beef packing, 85% of soybean processing, 63% of pork packing, and 53% of chicken processing. All these products and brands from just 10 huge corporations. 70% of toothpaste sales go to just 2 companies. Luxottica. They also own nearly all the eyeglass retail outlets. Practically every plastic hanger in America is now made by one company, Minetti. What brand of cat food shall I buy? There are basically just 2 companies. The problem with all this consolidation into a handful of giant firms is they don't have to compete, which means they can jack up your prices. Drug companies, in effect, pay the makers of generic drugs to delay cheaper versions. Such pay-for-delay agreements are illegal in other advanced economies, but antitrust enforcement hasn't laid a finger on them in America. They cost you and me an estimated $3.5 billion a year. Well, health insurers are consolidating too, which is one reason your health insurance premiums, co-payments, and deductibles are soaring. Massive consolidation into a handful of giant businesses is going on all over. You think you have lots of options for booking discount airline tickets and hotels online? Actually, you have only two. Expedia merged with Orbitz, so that's one company. And then there's Priceline. How about your cable and internet service? Basically, 4 companies. This is unfortunate to say the least, and not just because industries and services with little competition charge you more. It's also troubling because such consolidation keeps down wages. Workers with less choice of who to work for have a harder time getting a raise. When local labor markets are dominated by one major big box retailer or one grocery chain, for example, those firms essentially set wage rates for the area. These massive corporations also have a lot of political clout. That's one reason they're consolidating. Power. Antitrust laws were supposed to stop what's been going on, but today they're almost a dead letter. That hurts you.
Antitrust laws were used throughout the 20th century to good effect until shortly after the Powell Manifesto. Then in 1980, during the Reagan administration, there was a shift in the application of the antitrust laws and the attitude toward monopolies.
All this changed in the 1980s. After Robert Bork, who, incidentally, I studied antitrust law with at Yale Law School and then worked for when he became Solicitor General under President Ford, wrote an influential book called The Antitrust Paradox, which argued that the sole purpose of the Sherman Act is consumer welfare, which means that mergers and large size almost always create efficiencies that bring down prices and therefore should be legal. Bork's ideas were consistent with the conservative Chicago School of Economics and found a ready audience in the Reagan White House. Since then, even under Democratic administrations, antitrust has all but disappeared. We're seeing declining competition even in cutting-edge, high-tech industries. In the new economy, information and ideas are the most valuable forms of property. This is where the money is. We haven't seen concentration on this scale ever before. Google and Facebook are now the first stops for many Americans seeking news. Meanwhile, Amazon is now the first stop for more than half of American consumers seeking to buy anything. Talk about power. Contrary to the conventional view of an American economy bubbling with innovative small companies, the reality is quite different. The rate at which new businesses have formed in the United States has slowed markedly since the late 1970s. Big tech's sweeping patents, standard platforms, fleets of lawyers to litigate against potential rivals, and armies of lobbyists have created formidable barriers to new entrants. Google's search engine is so dominant, Google has become a verb.
Have you Googled her yet?
Willow, she's 17.
It's a search engine.
The European Union filed formal antitrust charges against Google, accusing it of forcing search engine users into its own shopping platforms. It fined Google a record $2.7 billion. But not in America. Remember, economic and political power cannot be separated because dominant corporations gain political influence over how markets are organized, maintained, and enforced, which enlarges their economic power further. One of the original goals of the antitrust laws was to prevent this. Big tech, along with the drug, insurance, agriculture, and financial giants, dominates both our economy and our politics. It is time to revive antitrust.
we've discussed how the extreme shift in financial wealth away from the middle class into the hands of corporations and the 1% was the result of passing laws. This begs the question, how did this happen? How does a democratic government pass laws which harm the vast majority of its citizens? The answer is with lobbyists. A nonprofit called Represent Us explain the process of how corporations influence lawmakers to pass grossly unpopular laws.
Number 1. So, if you're a politician, you have to raise an obnoxious amount of money just to run for office. And one of the easiest ways to raise that kind of cash is by turning to lobbyists. Alright, so here's how it works. Let's say you are a big bank. Now, you want to get a senator on the banking committee to vote your way on an upcoming bill. So, the easiest thing you could do would be to just, bribe him. I mean, you could give $100,000 directly to his re-election campaign, nice and clean. But, unfortunately for you, that is super illegal, I hope. Yep, still super illegal. So instead, you're gonna hire yourself a lobbying firm to serve as the middleman for what would in any sane universe basically just be a bribe. Your lobbyist can legally organize a swanky fundraiser that brings in $100,000 for the senator's re-election campaign, and at that fundraiser, your lobbyists can just happen to have a friendly chat with the senator's staff about your feelings on banking policy. At the end of the day, the senator is still up $100,000, he still knows exactly where that $100,000 came from, and he knows which way to vote if he wants the money to keep on flowing. But this time, nobody's broken any laws. Pretty sweet scam, right? This is a hugely common practice, and it helps explain the next item on our list. Number 2. So, in many cases, lobbyists actually write our laws. Literally. For example, let's take a look at the 2014 Omnibus Budget deal. Now, Congress used this deal to secretly put taxpayers back on the hook to bail out banks that engage in risky derivatives trading. Yes, derivatives. You might remember them from such things as causing the 2008 financial crisis, nearly destroying the economy of the United States, and almost causing Western civilization to fold in on itself. So yeah, that happened. Now, 70 of the 85 lines that put taxpayers back on the hook for these derivatives trades were cut and pasted word for word from model legislation that was drafted by Citigroup lobbyists. Citigroup, quite literally, wrote its own rules. And this isn't just a problem with the big banks. Like, just last week we reported on how lobbyists for the chemical industry may have authored an entire portion of a bill that shuts down efforts to crack down on toxic chemicals. This kind of behavior happens every single day. Number 3. So, lobbyists routinely offer members of Congress and their staffers lucrative jobs at their firms or their clients' companies once they leave office. This practice is often called the revolving door, and it works like this.
When we would become friendly with an office and they were important to us, I would say, or my staff would say to him or her at some point, when you're done working on the Hill, we'd very much like you to consider coming to work for us. Now, the moment I said that to them, that was it. We owned them. And what does that mean? Every request from our office, every request of our clients, everything that we want, they're going to do.
Yeah, just let that sink right in. This practice has become crazily common. In the 1970s, less than 5% of retiring legislators went on to become lobbyists. Now, half of all retiring senators and a third of retiring House members do. And it's hard to overemphasize how tempting a revolving door gig can be. Congressmen who go on to become lobbyists get, on average, a 1,452% raise. 1,400%! I mean, can you imagine what that kind of raise would do for you at, say, your job? Number 4. So, thanks to loopholes in how federal law defines what a lobbyist actually is, many elected officials go on to take what are effectively revolving door lobbying jobs without ever having to officially register as lobbyists. Now, researchers estimate that there's actually twice as much lobbying as what's publicly disclosed. That makes lobbying a $7 billion a year industry, and it means that only half of the people who are being paid to influence our elected officials are required to follow what few rules there actually are. Number 5. So possibly the most upsetting part of all of this is how ridiculously effective lobbying is. One study found that for every dollar a company spends on lobbying, it gets $220 back in tax savings. I mean, that's crazy. That is a 22,000% return on investment. And it works really well for both sides of the aisle, which is why top lobbying firms raise big money for both Republicans and Democrats, usually at the same time. Like right this second, there is a lobbying firm in DC called Akin Gump. Its roster is full of former members of Congress, and its clients include massive companies like the Chamber of Commerce, Monsanto, Boeing, and foreign governments like the United Arab Emirates and Japan.
So let's summarize this. Through lobbyists, number one, bribery is legal. Number two, as a result of the bribery, big businesses write their own laws and regulate their own industries. Number three, the bribe takes the form of a job offer worth an average of about $2.5 million a year. Number four, we can't identify half the lobbyists, and it's an estimated $7 billion per year industry at the federal level alone. And number five, for every dollar spent, there's a return of $220 in tax saving. So let's do the arithmetic. If it's a $7 billion per year industry and you get 220 times your money back in tax saving for every dollar spent, there's an estimated $1.5 trillion of undue influence exerted at the federal level of government every year. Let's say that again. $1.5 trillion of undue influence of bribery exerted on our federal government per year. This is bad. So what do we do? What is our call to action?
All this begs a pretty obvious question. Why don't we just ban lobbying altogether? Well, constitutionally we can't, and we really shouldn't. Lobbying itself isn't inherently evil. Like, the act of lobbying is just advocating a position to an elected official, and that's not the problem. It's protected by the First Amendment for a good reason. People need to be able to make a case to their elected representatives even if they can't be there in person. The problem is that lobbyists are routinely using money, favors, gifts, and lucrative job offers to do the convincing for them. Put more simply, you can lobby and you can donate money to a politician, but you should not be allowed to do both at the same time. It's like handing the referee $50 before the game starts and $50,000 right after the game.
So we're not going to ban lobbyists, but as a society we can pass laws to prevent corruption and bribery. What we need to do is pass anti-corruption laws, not wait for lawmakers to do it. They'll never do it. We need to do it ourselves. Represent Us, the same nonprofit which produced the previous video clip, gives a blueprint on how to solve the problem.
Lobbyists write our laws, politicians are bought, and corruption is infecting every issue that's close to our hearts. But what's even crazier is that we've all convinced ourselves that there's nothing we can do about it. And that is one of the biggest and most dangerous lies in American politics. The problem isn't that corrupt politicians are breaking the law. The problem is that we don't even have laws for them to break. Right now, corruption is legal in America, and that is something we can fix. Here's exactly how we do it. Right now, it's perfectly legal for special interests to hand huge checks to the members of Congress who regulate them. It's perfectly legal for those same members of Congress to pass laws to help out lobbyists who offer them a cushy job when they leave office. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. From million-dollar bundlers to the threat of a super PAC smear campaign, there are literally dozens of perfectly legal ways to buy a public official. But that makes the solution pretty obvious. Make corruption illegal. All of it. And that is where the American Anti-Corruption Act comes in. It introduces a strict set of ethical standards, so if you're an elected official on, say, the Senate Banking Committee, you can't take donations from banking lobbyists. It mandates full transparency so the American people know exactly who's trying to buy our elected officials. It changes how elections are funded so clean candidates can win without selling out to special interests. And it does all of this while protecting the people's right to free speech. That's because the act was written by top constitutional scholars, conservative and liberal alike, to stand up to the toughest scrutiny. You can read the full text of the act at anticorruptionact.org. And speaking of the Constitution, let's talk about a little Supreme Court ruling called Citizens United. Here's the thing. While a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United would help clamp down on those shady groups with names like Americans for Freedom and Jobs and More Freedom, it wouldn't fix any of the problems we talked about before. You could pass that amendment tomorrow and the bribery, the extortion, the conflicts of interest, all of it would still be legal. But in a weird way, that's actually good news because it means we can solve a huge part of this problem with a plain old law. The question is, how do we get it passed? I mean, asking Congress to do it is like asking a fox to put a lock on the henhouse. The greasy, dirty, disgusting fox. And also, the fox is a congressman and not a fox at all. Look, my point is, we can go around Congress using a little something called the ballot initiative process. It lets citizens pass laws ourselves, no politicians required. All we have to do is gather enough signatures, put anti-corruption acts up to a simple public vote, and we can start fixing the corrupt system right at home. Here's our plan, in 5 steps. First, we'll need a law to pass. One that, actually fixes things. Okay, Anti-Corruption Act. Check. Next, we need to bring conservatives and progressives together and get organized. It's the only way to build enough power to defeat the politically entrenched and well-funded opposition. We're in good shape there, though, because everyone already agrees we need to fix our corrupt system. In fact, local Tea Partiers and progressive activists actually teamed up to pass America's first Anti-Corruption Act in 2014. And the movement has racked up even more victories since. There are more than 22,000 cities in America where we can use the ballot initiative process to pass locally tailored anti-corruption acts. And this really matters. We're protecting our communities from corruption, so our schools, hospitals, local resources, and jobs are no longer under the constant threat of getting sold out to special interests. Plus, citywide initiatives and resolutions build momentum for the most powerful way we can go around Congress: passing anti-corruption acts in states. State acts not only clean up statewide corruption, they change how elections are funded so clean candidates can win office without selling out to special interests. That goes for federal candidates from that state too. Once we pass these state laws, we can send a new wave of representatives and senators to Washington. State by state, we can fill Congress with leaders who got elected under the rules of our new anti-corruption acts, replacing entrenched politicians with new blood. See how this works? By taking the fight to the states, we can fix Congress from the outside. And when these new representatives get to Congress, free from dependence on special interests, they'll be free to vote for and pass the American Anti-Corruption Act at the federal level to fix this problem for good. So that's the plan, and 500,000 Represent Us members couldn't agree more.
This last video was taken from a nonprofit, represent.us/start, and they invite you to this link where you can learn more and join a Pennsylvania chapter or any chapter in your state. Please note the anti-corruption movement is nonpartisan, Democratic and Republican. Both parties, Democrat and Republican, have attracted billionaire corporate influence and are guilty of corruption and undue influence of money. If you like this episode, please share it with the people on your contact list and social media friends. Signing off, tune in next time. Bye for now.